The spring sun poured through the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Church, laying ribbons of color across the white runner. The air smelled of polished wood, lilies, and expectation. Alina Carter stood at the entrance, her fingers trembling around a bouquet of white peonies and garden roses. The antique lace of her gown, borrowed from her grandmother's wedding trunk, whispered against the marble floor when she took her first hesitant step forward. She had pictured this moment 1,000 times. In every version, Ryan Whitmore would be waiting at the altar, smiling that easy, boyish smile that had made her feel safe for 2 years. In every dream, the music soared, the guests beamed, and her future unfolded as predictably as a well-rehearsed play. But reality did not match the script. As Alina lifted her gaze, scanning past rows of elegantly dressed guests, her heart stuttered. Father Benedict stood alone at the altar, hands clasped around a worn prayer book, his expression caught somewhere between sympathy and professionalism. There was no groom. The organist continued to play Pachelbel's canon, each bright, looping note suddenly too loud, too cheerful, a cruel contrast to the cold rising in Alina's chest. A murmur began in the left side of the church, then rippled across the pews like a chill wind through tall grass. Her mother, in the front row, had gone pale, one hand pressed to her chest. Her father half rose from the pew, as if deciding whether to comfort his daughter or sprint out in search of the missing groom. The world seemed to fracture into strange, floating details. The click of a pearl bracelet in the third row, a child's coloring book hitting the floor, dust motes spinning lazily in a shaft of colored light. Her mind recorded everything except the one truth she could not yet bear to name. Ryan was not there. Claire, her maid of honor and closest friend, hurried to her side, satin skirts swishing in sudden urgency. "Alina," she whispered, voice shaking, "I swear he was here 20 minutes ago. He was nervous, but I thought that was normal." 100 eyes shifted to the bride standing in the doorway, with no one waiting at the altar. Alina felt the weight of their pity and curiosity pressing against her skin like a too-tight dress. Heat burned beneath her ribs, not from anger yet, but from a slow, spreading humiliation. Then the heavy oak side door near the altar swung open with a groan that cut through the whispers. Julian Whitmore stepped into the sanctuary. At 35, Ryan's older brother wore authority the way other men wore cologne. His charcoal suit fit his tall frame like armor. Dark hair swept back from a face that was all clean lines and control. He moved with the unhurried confidence of someone used to boardrooms and headlines, not chaos in a church. Alina had met him a handful of times at family dinners and company events. He had always been polite, always distant, his gray, eyes observant in a way that made her feel evaluated. He ran Whitmore Holdings, the real estate empire their grandfather had built. Ryan worked in marketing. Julian built skyscrapers. Now he walked directly toward her, his gaze locked on hers. The church fell into a silence so complete that the organist's fingers slipped off the keys. The last chord faded into the rafters. Julian stopped at the head of the aisle, close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw. When he spoke, his voice was low, meant only for her, but it carried the weight of a verdict. "My brother is a coward," he said. "He left 20 minutes ago, claiming doubts he should have voiced months ago, not today." The words hit like physical blows. Alina's knees wobbled. Before she could sway, Julian's hand circled her elbow, steady and unexpectedly gentle. "I will not allow you to be humiliated like this," he continued, steel threaded through each syllable. "Not by my family, not in front of these people." She stared at him, stunned, caught between mortification and disbelief. You can still walk out, he said quietly. Cancel the reception. Face the whispers, the pity, the gossip that will follow you for months. He hesitated, and something in his expression shifted. Controlled, yes, but edged with something rawer. Or, he added, you can let me fix this. To the utter shock of everyone watching, Julian took a step back and dropped to one knee on the white runner. The congregation gasped as one. Somewhere in the church, a program slid from someone's fingers and fluttered to the floor. Marry me instead, Julian said clearly, his gray eyes never leaving hers. Today, right now, let me give you back your dignity. Let me prove that not all Whitmore men are faithless. It was not a plea. It was an offer, stark and impossible. Alina's thoughts spun. This was madness. She barely knew him. She knew his reputation, ruthless in business, brilliant in negotiations, allergic to gossip and scandal. She knew he preferred silence to small talk, that he watched more than he spoke. She should refuse. She knew she should. Why? She whispered, the question barely reaching the space between them. Why would you do this? Julian rose slowly, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. When he answered, his voice was rough with honesty. Because I have watched my brother take you for granted for 2 years, he said. Because you deserve better. And because if you walk out of here alone, this will be the day everyone remembers you were abandoned. If you walk out as my wife, this will be the day they remember that I claimed the woman my brother was too much of a coward to keep. It was not a declaration of love. It sounded like a contract written in the language of protection and pride. Somehow, the bluntness made it more compelling than any sugary promise could have been. Alina looked past Julian, at her mother's tear-streaked face, her father's clenched fists, Claire's shocked eyes, the relatives who had flown across the country. She imagined the canceled reception, the refunded deposits, the hushed phone calls. Did you hear? He left her at the altar. Then she looked back at Julian, at the man standing between her and public ruin, his jaw set, his eyes fierce, offering a different kind of future. She heard herself say, yes. The word sounded strange in her own ears, too calm, too steady, but it was unmistakable. I'll marry you. For a heartbeat, something flickered in Julian's expression. Relief, triumph, something too layered to name. Then he turned toward the altar. Father Benedict, he called, voice ringing through the nave. Shall we proceed? The priest blinked, stunned. Julian, this is highly irregular. The license lists your brother. Marriage is not a play where we change actors at the last minute. The license bears our family name, Julian said smoothly. Whitmore, the contract is with the family. Alina has consented. I see no legal reason we cannot continue, unless you know of one. Silence stretched. All eyes shifted to Alina. My dear, Father Benedict said gently, are you certain? This is a sacrament, not a performance. Alina felt Julian beside her. Solid, unmoving, a pillar in a landscape that had just collapsed. She thought of Ryan, who had run. She thought of Julian, who stepped forward. I'm certain, Father, she said. The next moments unfolded with dream-like clarity. Her father still walked her down the aisle, his whispered questions tangling in the air around them, unanswered. Julian waited at the altar, tall and still, his eyes following her every step. The ceremony was shorter than she had imagined, stripped of sentiment because there was no room for it. And yet, as they spoke the ancient vows, something weighty and real settled between them. When it came time for rings, Julian slid his own signet ring from his finger and, without hesitation, slipped it onto hers. It was too large, spinning slightly, but the metal was warm from his skin. His voice was calm when he said, "I, Julian Alexander Whitmore, take you, Alina Rose Carter, to be my lawfully wedded wife." There was something in the way he said "my" that sent a shiver down her spine. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Julian cupped her face with both hands and kissed her. It was brief, appropriate, and yet she felt the restrained heat beneath his control, a promise of fire under ice. They walked out of the church to polite, stunned applause, stepping into sunlight as Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, just not the version anyone had expected. The reception at the Whitmore estate blurred at the edges. Guests smiled too widely or avoided eye contact altogether. Questions were cloaked in congratulations. Julian stayed close, his hand at the avor, small of her back, steering her away from the most intrusive curiosity like a shield in human form. Only when the last toast had been made and the last guest had left did reality truly begin to sink in. In the quiet of the car, city lights streaking past the windows, Alina stared at the ring that didn't fit and the man who had just changed her life. "What have we done?" she whispered. Julian's hands tightened briefly on the steering wheel. "We've given ourselves options," he replied. "This marriage can be whatever we decide it is, a legal arrangement, a partnership, or something more. But it will not be a story of your humiliation." She turned her head to study his profile, sharp against the passing glow of traffic lights. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. The penthouse atop Whitmore Tower was all glass and precision, a sleek contrast to the old stone of St. Michael's. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Charleston like a painting. The harbor glittered beyond. Inside, everything was beautiful, curated, expensive, and oddly impersonal. "The guest suite is down the hall," Julian said, his tone slipping back into businesslike smoothness. "Your belongings will be moved tomorrow. For tonight, everything you need is there. Separate rooms, separate beds. This doesn't have to be more than you want it to be." She faced him, sudden frustration snapping through her fatigue. "Then what do you want it to be, Julian?" For a moment, he didn't answer. He walked to the windows, hands in his pockets, staring out at the glowing city. When he spoke, his voice had lost its polished edge. "Do you remember the charity gala at the Maritime Museum last summer?" he asked. "You wore a blue dress. You spent an hour talking to scholarship students about their dreams while Ryan worked the room, trying to impress donors." Alina blinked. She remembered the night, but she had assumed Julian had barely registered her existence. "I watched you," he said simply. "I watched you listen to those kids like they mattered. I watched my brother treat you like a decorative accessory, and I remember thinking that he was the biggest fool I'd ever known." He turned. The careful mask he wore in public had slipped, revealing something unguarded beneath. "I've been watching you for 2 years, Alina. Every family dinner, every company event, every time you walked into a room and made it kinder just by being there." He exhaled, a harsh, quiet sound. "I told myself it didn't matter, that you were his, that whatever I felt was inappropriate and would pass, so I kept my distance." Her heart thudded. "You never said anything." "Because talking to you made it worse," he said. "Every conversation reminded me how badly matched you and Ryan were. How much you deserved someone who would treasure you, instead of assuming you'd always be there. When I saw you standing at the head of that aisle today, abandoned in front of everyone you know." His voice roughened. "Something in me broke. I could not let that be the story of your life. And yes, some part of me saw a chance I never thought I'd have." The confession settled between them, heavy and electric. "I don't expect you to feel anything for me," Julian added, regaining a measure of control. "You've been through an emotional wreckage today. You need time. I just owed you the truth." Alina crossed the room before she consciously decided to move. She laid her hand against his chest, feeling the strong, hurried beat beneath crisp fabric. "You barely know me," she said again, but this time her voice was softer. "Then let me learn," he replied, covering her hand with his. "No pressure, no expectations, just time, to see if this can become something real." Her phone buzzed, a jarring intrusion, 17 missed calls from Ryan. A text waited beneath them. "Alina," I panicked. "I made a terrible mistake. Please don't do anything rash. I love you. We need to talk." Julian read it over her shoulder, his jaw turning to stone. "Apparently," he said quietly, "my brother has discovered consequences." Alina stared at the message until the words blurred. The hurt sharpened, but it was different now, tempered by anger and clarity. "He left me standing there," she said, finally saying it out loud. "He could have spoken to me. He could have called it off. He just ran." "What do you want to do?" Julian asked. "Not what you think you should do, what you want." She thought of 2 years of comfortable, unchallenging affection, of laughter that was pleasant but never deep, of a future that had looked safe, if strangely small. She thought of this man in front of her who had risked everything: reputation, family peace, his own carefully guarded privacy, to stand beside her. "I want to see him," she said slowly. "Not to go back, to close the door properly." Julian nodded. "I'll arrange a meeting. Neutral place. I won't interfere. But I won't let him corner you either." The next morning, in a quiet, private room overlooking the harbor, Ryan walked in late, rumpled and pale. His usual easy charm had been replaced by a haunted, desperate look. "I panicked," he said, hands raking through his hair. "Standing in that vestry, thinking about forever, about my parents, about being trapped in something I couldn't undo. I ran. I know I chose the worst way possible, but we can fix it, Alina. We can annul this thing with Julian and start over. Do it right." Alina listened. Really listened. And for the first time, she saw him clearly, not as the man she had hoped he might be, but as the man he consistently chose to be. Someone who avoided discomfort at all costs. Someone who wanted the easiest path, even if it cut through someone else's heart. "You think I married Julian out of revenge?" she asked, quietly. "What else could it be? You barely know him. He's my brother. This is insane." "You're right about one thing," she said. "I barely knew him, but I'm learning. And what I've seen so far is that Julian has shown more courage and integrity in a week than you have in 2 years." She rose, feeling the last ties to her old life loosen. "I'm going to give this marriage a chance," she said. "A real one. You and I, we're comfortable. But I'm done mistaking comfort for love." Later, when she walked back into the restaurant lobby and slid her hand into Julian's, the simple gesture told him everything he needed to know. "Take me home," she said. That night, on the penthouse terrace, with the city glittering below them like scattered stars, they ate dinner Julian had cooked himself. He told her about the architecture degree he'd once wanted, the blueprints he'd abandoned when his father died, and the way he tried to build something meaningful anyway, through affordable housing, restored historic buildings, spaces that gave people dignity. She told him about her father learning to read at 35, about the literacy center where she worked, about the glow in an adult student's eyes when words finally came into focus. "Every person who learns to read there," she said, "is my dad getting his second chance." Julian reached across the table and took her hand. "You are extraordinary, Alina Carter Whitmore." The sound of her full married name in his voice sent a flutter through her chest. She rose, stepped closer, feeling the electric thrum in the air between them. "Kiss me," she said softly. "Not because we're supposed to, because you want to." "Are you sure?" he asked. Her answer was a kiss that erased the distance between impulse and certainty. The kiss in the church had been a formality. This one was a revelation, of hunger long checked, of desire carefully caged. His control frayed, her restraint vanished. When he finally swept her into his arms and carried her toward his bedroom, the choice was mutual, deliberate, and entirely theirs. Morning came with soft light and tangled sheets. Julian's arm lay heavy across her waist, his breathing slow and even against her shoulder. Alina watched him sleep, the hard lines of his face smoothed, the weight he carried invisible for a few vulnerable minutes. "Good morning, wife," he murmured when his eyes opened. "Good morning, husband," she answered, surprised at how right the word felt. By evening, they were booking flights to Shanghai. A crisis in a major development project demanded Julian's presence. He asked her to come with him, to call it a honeymoon if they liked, to give them space to figure out what this marriage could be away from Charleston's gossip and expectations. On the plane, he spread out blueprints for a mixed-use project: residential towers, a community center, classrooms. When she asked questions, he lit up. They spent hours bent over plans, refining ideas. She pointed out where reading nooks could go, how parents might use the space, how design could invite people in instead of intimidating them. "I think I fall a little more in love with you every time you talk about this," he said quietly at one point, almost to himself. She reached for his hand. "Then keep talking," she said. "I like the direction this is going." Shanghai met them with neon light and relentless energy. The project crisis was real. Cut corners in foundation work, a board pressing him to abandon the development. Julian fought back, refusing to sacrifice safety or the community's future for a cleaner balance sheet. Alina saw him at his fiercest and most vulnerable, arguing with engineers, reassuring workers, taking midnight calls with government officials. She saw the exhaustion in his shoulders, the doubt that flickered when he thought no one was watching. One late night on the balcony, when the city roared below them like an endless tide, he admitted, "They think I'm being sentimental, weak, a bleeding heart in a suit." "Then they're fools," she said. "This, what you care about, is the reason you win, not a weakness, your edge." He pulled her into his arms as if anchoring himself. The next blow came not from concrete or contracts, but from headlines. An article exploded online. "Whitmore brother steals groom's bride in staged wedding stunt." An unnamed competitor, Marcus Thornton, fed rumors to the press, painting Julian as manipulative, Alina as complicit or naive. The narrative twisted their story into something ugly and hollow. Alina read the article with her heart thudding, shame and anger battling in her chest. Everything she had tried to outrun in Charleston had followed her halfway across the world. "What do we do?" she asked. "If I deny it, it feeds the fire," Julian said, jaw hard. "If I stay silent, it looks like guilt." She thought of her parents reading those words, of the students at the literacy center, of being reduced forever to a scandal headline. "Then we don't deny," she said slowly. "We tell the truth. Once, to someone who will actually listen." He studied her. "That means opening our lives, our feelings." "We're already exposed," she replied. "At least this way, we tell our own story instead of letting Marcus write it for us. Let them see it the way it really is. A messy, unexpected love story, not a stunt." In the days that followed, they did exactly that. They sat in their Shanghai penthouse with a respected journalist and told the truth. About the empty altar, the impulsive proposal, the confession of a 2-year restraint, The choice she made not out of revenge, but out of a willingness to believe there might be something more than comfort waiting for her. Julian said, "Some structures are built according to perfect plans. Others rise from unexpected foundations. That doesn't make them any less sound." Alina added, "Our story doesn't follow the usual steps, but unusual doesn't mean unreal." When the article was published, the narrative shifted. People recognized themselves in the messiness, the risk, the courage it took to choose an unplanned life. The scandal cooled. Investor confidence steadied. The project in Shanghai moved forward, stronger, safer, better designed, with a community center whose reading corners bore Alina's fingerprints in every detail. Months later, back in Charleston, on a warm evening washed in gold, they hosted a small gathering at home. No vows, no white dress, just family and friends who had chosen to stand with them. Ryan came, sober and quieter, and apologized, not just for the altar, but for 2 years of taking her for granted. She forgave him, truly, not because he deserved it, but because she had no room left in her life for bitterness. Her heart was occupied. As the sun slipped below the harbor, painting the sky in amber and rose, Alina stood with Julian at the edge of their terrace, his arm around her waist. "We took the strangest beginning," he murmured, "and built something real." "We're still building," she said, leaning into him. "This is just the foundation." He turned her in his arms, gray eyes soft with a love that no longer surprised either of them. "Then here's to every floor, every beam, every unexpected room we add." She rose on her toes and kissed him, unafraid of who might be watching now. "I love you, Julian Whitmore," she said. "My unexpected husband, my partner in all of this." "I love you, Alina Carter Whitmore," he answered. "The bravest choice I ever made." Years later, with children who had his eyes and her laugh, with projects bearing both their signatures in steel and ink, with literacy centers and community courtyards standing where empty lots once lay, they would look back on that day at St. Michael's, not with shame, with gratitude, for the crisis that became a doorway, for the empty altar that made room for a different groom, for the moment she said yes to something wild and unplanned. They would know, with the quiet certainty that comes only with time, that sometimes the foundations of the greatest loves are poured in the ruins of the plans we thought we wanted, and that what they built together, imperfect, hard-won, fiercely chosen, was nothing less than extraordinary.